Okay, welcome to Silicon Valley Health Institute. I'm Robert Minkemiller. I've been a nutritionist for 25 years now and love the natural health field. I'm a member of the board of directors here for the last couple of years, but been attending for probably 15 or so. Any first-time visitors here? Not tonight? Okay. Oh, sorry. Well, welcome. I'm glad to have you. Hopefully you'll join us for future meetings as well. We're a membership-driven organization, which means we're a non-501c3 nonprofit organization, so we rely on your donations and your memberships. Our memberships are $60 a year, which is unbeatable in my opinion. Then if you want to just come for one evening, it's $10 at the door there. So please silence your cell phones, and if you're concerned about EMFs, please turn them off, especially the ringtone there. If you must take an emergency call, please be considerate and go outside and take the call there, just so we don't interrupt the flow of the meeting. The meeting is streaming live on the web, so welcome to live streamers. And when we usually open up with an open forum, which means you guys get a chance to ask any question you like. We have several experts here, as well as the panel, and our technical director, Steve Fowkes, and lots of practitioners here that can answer a variety of questions for you around your health. So the restrooms are located down the hallway to the left, about 100 yards down on your right. It's a nice little exercise at lunch or at the break. We'll take a break probably around 9 o'clock, 10 to 9, somewhere around there. We'll figure it out. Does anybody have any announcements they'd like to make?
I'm hosting a very well-known teacher in Europe on intuition, and all of you know how important it is to learn how to tune into our intuitive self. So it's called Practical Intuition for Health and Life, and there's 3 workshops next week, and there's also one on Saturday. So I have left flyers here and also a sign-up sheet if anybody at the break wants to come up and look at it or talk to me about it. She's from Austria, and she's been doing this for 29 years, teaching internationally about medical intuition and other ways of accessing our health. So it's really important for our health. And she's from my hometown where I grew up, so I'm helping her to do that. Yeah, there's information on the table. Thank you.
Any other announcements? Okay, so the forum usually opens with any questions from the audience. Be sure you wait until I get the microphone to you so our live streamers at home can hear you. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to open up with? Any comments, thoughts, ideas around health? Any new technologies? Ideas? None, huh? Okay, hold on.
I have a friend who had a stroke, and he's having really a lot of cognitive problems. And I'm just wondering if anybody knows, he's seen therapists and so forth, but it just doesn't seem to help. And I'm wondering if there's any mind exercises or something similar that he could practice and maybe get some of his functioning back, because he has a hard time forming sentences. He has a hard time remembering to do certain tasks and so forth.
One of the things we learned when we did stroke patients, the good part of the arm, the one that hasn't had the stroke, if they start using that, it somehow trains the other side to start working as well. And some of the things we used to do is we used to have the, just following light or finger and having them train their eyes to follow as much as they can. It's also good for exercises. And then, you know, we used to use a lot of visual things like words and have them just look at the words and then and try to pronounce it as much as they can. But they need visual contact as much as they can and movement with the good part of the body. And then once they develop that, the brain somehow connects to the damaged sites and starts working with them. And methylene blue works really well by raising complex 4, which is really good for brain. And you know, Steve can tell you a lot of things like paracetin and other things that helps with oxidative damage. There's a lot of oxidative damage in that inflammatory path. You need to address that.
We don't personally do a lot of work, but Maurice and I are into the field of light therapies, and it's a field that's moving like crazy. Who asked the question, by the way? So I can address you. No. Okay. Bill. And what happens in a stroke, obviously, is you lose tissue. All right, so some tissue is dead, but the area around the stroke is called the peri-infarction area. And that area is damaged but not functional. And it may stay that way for weeks to months to years. And when you apply light therapy to these people's brains, and there's a fair amount of research on this now, what it does is it stimulates the release of nitric oxide and increases ATP production and allows that tissue to begin to function more normally. So there's big hope in that field. The same thing with pulsed electromagnetic fields. And two other things that seem to help with the stroke a lot. One is acupuncture, and a third one, the other one is neurofeedback. There's a fellow named Len Oakes, who I don't know if you guys know. He's up in the Napa area and has been doing that for a long time and has had fairly good success. So there's today a lot more that you can do than we could 20 years ago, say, in that whole thing.
You might also check out Sergio Azzolino, who's a functional neurologist, and he's spoken here a couple times in San Francisco, because it's important to find out which parts of the brain are weak, and he'll give you particular exercises to stimulate the weak parts, because if you stimulate the strong parts, you're going to have an imbalance. So you want to stimulate the right parts, and he can assess which parts need stimulating and give you exercises to do so.
I know, too, hyperbaric oxygen immediately after the stroke is good, but long-term helpful? Hold on one second now. I lost track of who was next. Hold on.
So a number of years ago, I ordered one of those kind of brain training pieces of software that came in the mail. And along with it came with this, a surprise, a really wonderful book. And it's called The Brain That Changes Itself, Stories of Personal Triumph from the Frontiers of Brain Science. And one of the things I would think is important to note in here is that the thinking used to be that, say, 2-3 months, people would reach a plateau and the improvement would stall. And they would think that's it, that's all you get. But what's understood now is that if you keep training, and part of it is some of the therapy, they actually put a mitten on the good hand and have these people like wash dishes with the arm that doesn't work. And there's some amazing stories in there that'll give you a lot of hope about loss of, say, 97% of the brain stem, where the guy recovered. This was, as I recall, in one of the early chapters, a professor at New York City College who went back to become a professor eventually. So read that. The brain's plastic. It has amazing recovering abilities. But like Susan's, it's all different. It depends on where it is and stuff like that. But the brain's amazingly adaptable if you give it the chance. So don't stop.
I have a couple of suggestions. One would, because this is specifically a verbal deficit, that you look at paracetam. Paracetam can have the recovery time from following a stroke in clinical studies. So that in and of itself is worth trying, but having the left brain, right brain being able to communicate more effectively with each other is a key to language processing skill set, and men are naturally dysfunctional in that dimension anyway. Second, I'd emphasize again the nitric oxide issue and suggest that you do a clinical assessment of his verbal skills, and then give him a nitric oxide stack of whatever combination of different things that you do, and maybe even including nitrate-rich vegetable smoothie or something like that, as well as arginine or vinpocetine or whatever. Beet juice, okay, yeah. And see whether or not there's a step function change in response to that nitric oxide load. And if there isn't, move on to other things. And if there is, then focus on nitric oxide therapy. Third thing was, in the initial stages of hypoxia, bringing oxygen back to the tissues can be very therapeutic. But in terms of longer range changes, you can have inflammation being a mechanism that becomes chronic and stuck, that the tissues become locally inflamed, and consider hydrogen gas as a reducing agent that can diffuse into the brain. So buy a case of hydrogen-infused water. I think it's like 12 or 24 bottles, and it's expensive because it's really heavy when they ship it to you. But start off and do 1 the first day, and then 2 the second day, and then 3 the third day, and 4 the fourth day. Just load up on drinking the hydrogen-rich water and see if that calms down the inflammation in the brain to the point that the vasoconstriction that might be restricting blood flow can then open up again, and you can see some verbal improvements. And the last thing is very, very the lowest tech possibility, and that is look at B-complex vitamins in doses about 10 times the RDA.
What I've seen is very successful in my office is using a coherent low-level laser light. And if he wants to work with a chiropractor that has a neurology background, Sergio and I were classmates, a chiropractor can train him how to do it 3 times a day. And it's certain points that you point for 30 seconds. And also if he has a partner that can hold the laser while he's doing certain exercises, that will drive the neurological pathway. So even if he's raising his arm 10 times, he'll get a lot more rehabilitation effect if he's using a laser to drive that neurological pathway. Now it's probably expensive to see a chiropractor 3 times a day for 60 days. But if he can purchase a low-level laser, coherent light, not an LED, but coherent light, so actually the photons can penetrate through the skull to the brain, and a chiropractor can train him how to do this 3 times a day at home, I think that's a worthwhile investment among everything else.
Hi, I'm Gabby. I came a year ago across the Nikon magnetic technology and kind of accidentally discovered that with children with ADD and autism, the sleep system where you, like in a cocoon of this magnetic field, very fast gives neurological improvements, I mean, in their symptoms. And I think that would be something, could be something worth to try out. Currently, I do my own private sleep studies with such children, and so I'm lending out the sleep system for 1 week, and and if there is interest, I'm available to lend that. It was your friend, yeah. So to lend that out.
I've heard quite a bit of really good stuff about hyperbaric oxygen therapy. So that's the first thing of choice. Now, if you can't get the hyperbaric, you can buy an oxygen concentrator off of Craigslist for I got one for $150. It's not going to be as good as hyperbaric, but it's pure oxygen, and so I'd recommend that. Relative to nitric oxide, there's a supplement called NEO40, NEO40, which specifically improves nitric oxide. So I'd buy some of that. If you don't like the price of it, eat lots of beets and kale.
One other thing that I'd like to mention is that many times in people's lives, their body can become off balance because of lifestyle factors, biochemical individuality, epigenetics, inflammation, and that they don't really have the full impact of that imbalance until they have a trauma. And then that imbalance prevents them from their healing from their trauma and stuff. And because this is a pre-existing condition, it's often not examined. And so I would consider looking at something as simple as electrolytes as something that might be missed by the medical practitioners involved in the case. So for example, as we age and our metabolism drops, we tend to overutilize potassium, which means the serum potassium goes down and the cellular potassium goes up. So you end up with potassium stress. And at the same time, the cells stop absorbing water efficiently, so there's actually cellular dehydration. And when normally in a medical workup, a neurological workup, you'll see, 99.9% of the time they'll do a serum potassium, and 1% of the time they'll do a cellular potassium. So you don't really get that dynamic of potassium overutilization. And as people age, their metabolism can go down, and so they can have cold hands and feet, and poor circulation, and poor, mitochondrial function. And because it's so common, it's taken for granted, and nobody realizes that there's an electrolyte stress that's associated with that could be investigated. I've also seen situations where, because the serum potassium goes down when the cellular potassium goes up, that the doctors will either actively or aggressively treat the low serum potassium and completely overload the nervous system with excess cellular potassium in trying to treat that. And so that's an example of electrolyte stress that is often ignored. Secondarily, there's also a calcium-magnesium issue that happens because magnesium deficiency is so common in our society today. And we also tend to have vitamin D and vitamin K deficiencies that mess with the calcium-magnesium ratio big time, that produces neurological stress and excitatory stress that will often never be treated.
Hold on. Follow-up question. So why is magnesium deficiency so common?
99% of magnesium is inside the cell, and 1% is in the serum. And if you're not taking in a lot of magnesium, you're not going to pick up that there's a magnesium deficiency. So what happens is you'll measure serum magnesium at the expense of cellular loss. So you have to measure an intracellular magnesium to know where you are. When you've got a magnesium level that's the low end of normal, probably you've got a cellular magnesium defect that's even worse. And in the hospitals, they're measuring serum magnesiums. I don't think I've never seen anybody do an intracellular magnesium level. So that's what we're seeing a lot of the time. Well, there's a lot, when you're sick, a lot of funny things happen. If you're an alcoholic or you're a diabetic, there's an extra loss of it. If you have other metabolic conditions like kidney insufficiency, you're going to have an excess of it. So it's not a dietary thing because there's plenty of magnesium in what we eat. If you eat vegetables or green things, you're going to get plenty of magnesium. And some of it's absorption, sure. So I think that's what you see. Maybe you other aspects that you want to get into, but that seems enough to me.
The other thing is, if you read, there's a book that just came out on magnesium. It's basically the absorption. The highest absorption was found in malate. Magnesium malate was the highest. I tend to use that, and glycinate works even better. A lot of it also because of the excessive stress that goes on and the NAD levels go down, magnesium deficiency occurs, and there's also B6 relationship with zinc that you have to understand. They're all part of the whole domino effect. Another thing that I just remembered, Jerry Jacobson, I don't know if you know who he is. He's a phenomenal MD who owns the patents on DMSO. Do you know about that? And Jerry used to tell me about, was it Jerry Jacobson? Yeah. He used to tell me a lot about how he treated stroke and heart conditions. He would do IVs of DMSO. and he had phenomenal results. I remember working in sports. I got into DMSO very early in life because of the veterinarian and Jerry. And when we had an injury, if we apply DMSO right away to the injury on the spine or anywhere, immediately it reduced the oxidative damage, and the repair mechanism accelerated dramatically. One time I had a concussion syndrome in a basketball player named Marcus, who was with the Clippers, and we put the DMSO, and we gave him orally, and he recovered totally from having miss a game or anything. So taking it orally is pretty amazing what it does.
My understanding is, for example, women who are menstruating, they lose a lot of magnesium through menstruation.
Yeah.
That's why they crave dark chocolate. But also my understanding is that most of us have acidic pH. And when you have acidic pH, if you do a pH strip and test your urine, and if you're below 7.0, you're just peeing out a lot of magnesium.
Also, too, I know Dr. Russell Jaffe, who's speaking here in April, he uses the ionized glycinate, and he also recommends choline citrate because the magnesium gets destroyed in the gut, and the choline citrate helps to increase the absorption of the magnesium. So, one second.
This is a question about the DMSO and also about concussions. I was just wondering how you take DMSO orally for that, and could some of these things that other people have spoken about help for concussions as well?
Yes, you can drink DMSO as long as it's dilute. So if you make up a solution, it's like 1 or 2%. You know, it might be gross to your nose, but it's pretty easy to get it down. And the nice thing about drinking it, you end up with maximizing your bad breath from the DMSO outgassing, but you're less likely to have a toxic problem. So if you're using DMSO as an emergency injury kind of therapy, one of the places that it's very, very useful is automobile accidents. And when you're in an automobile accident, you might have, smoke contamination on your skin. You might have other kinds of cosmetic problems, issues, residues deposited on your skin. Who knows? And if you put DMSO in through the skin, you're carrying whatever's on your skin through into your body, whereas internally you don't have that kind of an issue, and therefore drinking it is a safer way to, for example, handle spinal cord injuries and other kinds of bruising traumas.
I'll tell you a story about in the 80s when I was in LA. I was working with a woman who was a film director, and she was doing Party of Five. Have you remember that show? And she did a lot. And she developed a very severe fungus, candida, because she travels a lot. And it was so bad she couldn't function. She was literally unable to function. And so she came in the office. This is right after I was with Jerry Jacobson on the phone. We were talking about some of the work we're working on with him. And I put her on a diluted form of DMSO 2 to 3 times a day. In several days, it completely eradicated everything. The only problem was she couldn't go to the studio because the smell was so. Her body was coming out fumes of garlic. So she had a problem about that, which was, but her health completely recovered. And she tried antibiotics for a week or so. Nothing worked for her. And the same thing happened to a guy who did the movie called Rambo. He had an infection. He was filming, and he got seriously ill. So his stunt guy came in, and I said, get him on DMSO right away. And he, 2 or 3 days, says, what the hell did you do to me? I thought I killed him. And he said he totally recovered from this infection he developed in one of the Thailand where he was filming. It works amazing, and I don't know. But you have to be aware, it does cause a tremendous odor to come right out of your body. And so you have to expect that.
Look, doctors know about this too. The fact is, we use it intravenously for people who have increased intracranial pressure, so it's given intravenously. It's given for interstitial cystitis inside the bladder. It can be used topically on burns, and within a few seconds, like 20 or 30 seconds, if you have a second or third degree burn, the pain will be gone. Gone. So it's amazing stuff that's terribly underutilized, mostly because doctors don't know that much about it. And it sounds like it's something, dimethyl sulfoxide, my God, that's got to be terrible for you. So it's just been one of the best kept secrets in medicine.
It's also underutilized in the general population because of the body odor issue and the bad breath issue. But part of the benefit that DMSO offers is because it's a very small molecule and it diffuses through the body as if there's no barriers to it. So if you rub it on your foot, for example, you can taste it in your mouth within a minute. That's how fast it moves. And as a molecule, the DMSO molecule is an antioxidant. It's able to interact with free radicals to bring down the tone of oxidative damage in your body systemically. So if you have inflammation in your brain, it'll work there. If it's in your deep joint tissues where you don't, like in your knee, where you don't have much blood circulation, the DMSO will penetrate into it just fine. So it's amazingly effective on that level. Now, there's a new reductive or antioxidant kind of therapy that's now out. It's actually been around for 50 years, but it's now undergoing a resurgence in the United States, is looking at hydrogen gas as an antioxidant. That does the same thing, diffuses into tissues, but it doesn't have bad breath problems. So you might want to investigate that.
Okay, we need to get started. One more. Okay.
Has anybody ever heard of done the turpentine remedies using turpentine? I just started with 5 patients, so we'll see what happens. One's with cervical cancer, one with brain cancer, and severe. I have a friend of mine, I'll tell you his story. He's a NASA scientist. He's a brilliant scientist. As a matter of fact, I introduced him to UCLA. He was one of the first ones to work with us with Rife technology. He was not doing well. He was having serious liver condition, and he had severe arthritis. And there's a woman named Jennifer Daniels. If you go into her website, you'll see about the remedy. I then emailed Ray Pete. I said, Ray, have you ever looked into turpentine? And he says, yeah, we used to use it when I was a child for a lot of remedies. It's a very interesting. He completely eradicated his liver condition. He was in the hospital, in and out of the hospital. His arthritis is totally gone. And if anybody has ever done that, let me know, because I've started 5 more people on it recently. And the results, and there's a woman with who's got a benign tumor in the brain. She's on it now. Her name is Heaven. She's a member here. She used to come here. So we're going to do an MRI study with her, with Raymond Damanium, the inventor of the MRI and Phonar. And he's going to follow her through with this turpentine remedy. It's called Turpentine remedy, and look it up. It's pretty interesting what it does.
How much do you give her?
How you do it, here's how we did it with 7 people now, and with the fellow who's from NASA. Take 12 drops. You want to buy what's called 100% gum, turpentine, okay? And you want to put it into an ounce bottle, and you want to make sure you measure 2 cubes. You need 2 to 3 sugar cubes. And you drop it 12 times slowly. You don't do it fast until all the cubes get saturated. And then you wait 3 minutes till the whole saturation process occurs. You grab those 3 with a teaspoon, tablespoon, you put it in your mouth, and you follow with water. You don't do it for 5 days. We learned that you gotta give it time because it is potent. It will work. And you give every 5 days, you increase to 12 to 24. Then the next 5 days to 36. And it's amazing. He's never had so much energy in his life that he's now working back in NASA developing all kinds of technology for them. And I've heard that from a lot of people that we suggested for arthritis. It works amazing. Now you can also take turpentine and castor oil, olive oil, and rub it into your body. There's a lot of medicinal essential botanicals out there that have turpentine in it, you know, naturally, like eucalyptus and camphor. So it is used medicinally for pain, and it gets rid of pain. I had somebody who had, and where's Lynn? Remember Lynn, we were talking about that? Yeah, and it gets rid of pain. I've done it with several people. So it's an interesting new thing, and it's almost doesn't cost anything.
Okay,